Good evening, everybody. I am very taken by the pronunciation of this, and I started to call it allelopathy because people around me did. However, I also like to go online and look up the pronunciation of things. And I found it is also pronounced allelopathy. So you have a choice here, but the ultimate meaning is the same. I said, no, it is not some type of allele because it has nothing to do with the areas on genes. Well, it probably does because a lot of this is genetic. Let us move forward. Allelopathy comes from two Greek words, allelon, each other, and pathos, suffer. And if you go and look at the literature on this, you will find that the Greeks actually used a form of this word. The whole concept that one plant in some way influences the growth of another plant is actually very, very old. It's only recently that science has actually become involved in this. What good is it? Well, all plants have to compete in order to live. Sunlight, nutrients, water, space. It is a tough world out there. I was thinking about this today because I actually answered a question for a woman who had screech owls that were in a tree in her yard, and she was very upset because one of them had died. I did some research on that this morning and found out that 70% of all owls die within the first 6 months after they hatch. And you could look at many animal species and see that, or the whole world would be covered with all these creatures. The same thing is true for plants. It is a tough world out there, and most of them actually don't survive. So what is allelopathy? A biological phenomenon in which biochemicals are produced by one organism that affects the growth, survival, germination of seed, reproduction, and or the ultimate survival of that plant. Below or here is a list of plants that are famous or infamous, as I like to call it, for allelopathy. Everybody has heard about black walnuts. But we're going to take a look this evening at some of the others. Okay, ailanthus or tree of heaven is famous for this. Fragrant sumac, rice, believe it or not, peas, garden peas, sorghum, garlic, mustard, maybe. And here's a list with some other things: eucalyptus, pepper, manzanita, goldenrod, sugar maple, sycamore, red oak, black locust, and American elm. My interest in this came about entirely by accident. A couple of years ago, I was visiting Cornell University, and I was a part of a group from our master gardeners that was participating in and learning about the various studies. And they had different plants growing in different plots, and they were making measurements. And someone mentioned when I was there about goldenrod having this property. And I looked at the person, and I had never heard about that in my life. And I did some research on it. It's funny how a very small thing will trigger an interest. Let's look at black walnut first, because this is the mother lode of allelopathy, okay? it has properties in its leaves, its buds, its roots, its nut hulls, and it also secretes juglone into the soil. So it's a respiratory inhibitor for some, but not all plants. Now, most plants store these substances only in their leaves, and they relieve gases through the stomata. Now, you may have noticed this in the wild. You may have also noticed this in your garden. You may say sometimes, what is wrong with this particular area? I can't seem to grow anything here except, let us say, daylilies, which happen, by the way, to be an example of something that people grow in their garden that exhibits this property. But black walnut does more than any plant that I've been able to research. Look at that. Leaves, buds, roots, nut hulls. Look at that. Also, hickories and pecans do exactly the same thing. Sometimes when people look under hickory or pecan trees, they say, oh, nothing is growing there because it's taking up all the nutrients. That may be true in some cases, but studies have been done on these, and they do know the substances that they secrete. So, why is this important? Okay, it's important not only for competition, but they have found that it is also associated with resistance to scab in hickories and anthracnose in black walnut. So there's other things going on. Plant resistance to disease, of course, is a very, very important one. And this is a diagram I found, which I thought was really good. And if you are into biochemistry, below you can see how juglone is produced. If you look at the canopy of an eastern black walnut tree, Juglans nigra, you will notice that plants wilt and die right out to the edge of the root zone. And after that, they live. So the juglone is concentrated in a particular area. It doesn't even seem to ooze through the soil. It only goes to a certain depth too. That depends on the nature of the soil. A lot of times, I don't know why this one is here. A lot of times, plants that are placed or start to grow underneath black walnut trees will start to yellow and start to wilt, especially in the summertime when juglone is given off at its highest levels. And people not knowing better think, oh, well, they need water. So they water these plants and nothing happens. They die anyway. And the reason for this is if you have a plant that starts to wilt and it needs water and it's not dead yet, but you know it's wilting, it's giving you a little signal, you might say, and you water it, it'll perk right up. So if you have juglone there secreted into the soil and it takes it up, this is not a reversible process, and eventually it will die. And there have been experimental studies, and this is very, very important, that shows that juglone inhibits plant respiration, it deprives plants of energy, it stops cell division, it keeps plants from taking up water, and it keeps plants from taking up nutrients. I found it important to put this statement here, experimental studies, because I found in my research, I've been to libraries. A good thing I did it before because I can't get in there now. I've done research online on this subject, and I find out that a lot of the information on allelopathy is word of mouth. It is a difficult thing to study plants to find out what their exudates are or what comes out of the stomata of their leaves and capture it and try it out on other plants. But a lot of work has been done on juglone, which is probably part of the reason that we know so much about it. Good soil inhibits juglone. How? I'm going to give you a moment to think about that, because if we were together, I'd let you talk to me about this. Okay, what's good soil? Well, good soil is loamy, right? It allows water to get through. It's rich in nutrients. The pH is appropriate for plants to grow. So when it rains, right? When it rains, the water would be able to percolate through this soil, and it would enable the juglone to be carried down much more deeply into the soil and have less of an effect of plants that grow around that tree. So good soil is important. If it's compacted, the juglone, the black walnut, will win. Here are some plants that seem to be immune to it. And this is based, again, not just on casual observation, but on measurements. Most maples, eastern red cedar, I know you can read, Ohio buckeye, golden rain tree, serviceberry, sweet gum, pawpaw, and yellow poplar. How long does it persist? A long time in the roots themselves. But I find it very interesting that as a person who composts, that you can compost the leaves, because after 2 to 4 weeks, the juglone breaks down in compost and the leaves will break down just like any other. So you don't have to toss them, or depends where you live if you happen to be, using them. It's a great thing. Gardeners, if you're a gardener and you have one of these trees, you don't grow tomatoes near it, eggplant or potatoes, those three are all in the same plant family, which probably explains that a bit, as well as peppers. You have no rhubarb, no asparagus, no peas, they won't grow. Remember, peas were in our original list, so they're giving off substances as well. Only grasses that seem to grow under these trees, are tall fescue and Kentucky bluegrass. And this was done at Cornell, I understand. So let's move on. Okay, let's look at our tree of heaven. I love that name because that's not what you would call it. Ailanthus altissima. Okay, there's always an identification issue with a lot of people here. If you break a twig and you smell it, you will know. It's got kind of a rancid smell. And I hope that you all know it's a host plant for spotted lanternfly, which I see has been found in the far eastern part, by the way, of New York State. The leaflets are smooth, they're not serrated, and if you look very closely at them, the base of each of them has little tiny glands. And if you are around when they're producing their fruit, they produce samaras, as does a maple tree. Those are samaras. I go to a podiatrist every once in a while, take my husband or my mom, and I got all excited because it was a tree of heaven growing in the parking lot. And I had to go out and break a branch. And everybody said, what is she up to now? But I think identification is so important. Now, it's an invasive. I think most people know it's an introduced species. Okay. The interesting thing is it affects native and non-native species. Very often, if you have a conversation with people about introduced non-native species. They tend to think that those species will do well around it, but they don't. They don't. Nothing does well around this. There are many reasons for its success. Its reproduction has loads of wind. I have wind that's supposed to be twined, okay? Seeds. They resprout. If you cut it down, it resprouts from stumps and its lateral roots. It grows like a weed. But look at the chemicals that are produced in it. Terpenoids, alkaloids, glycosides, flavonoids, coumarins. You've heard of that word before. Okay, quinones, sapotins, phenolic compounds. Why does it do it? To protect itself from herbivores. How do we know this? Because they've actually tried to feed it to them and they don't like it. But it also protects it from fungi, insects, protozoa, and viruses. It is used in Chinese medicine for this very reason. So this plant is really a character. But look at all the substances it produces to protect itself. These have been isolated in laboratories and they have tested them out on various plants. That's why it is so successful. Those of you who are into the study of ferns should realize that hay-scented ferns and bracken ferns and New York ferns are also allelopathic. Why only these three? It has to do, people believe that the only thing that they really have in common, apart from the fact that they're ferns, is the way the fronds grow. They grow singly, they don't grow in clumps, and they spread by rhizomes, and they form these impenetrable stands, which make it difficult for other plants to grow there, but they also give off, exude, if you will, substances which are detrimental to other plants' growth. Okay, and they are known to deter tree seedling growth. And if you have seen what people like to call a fern desert, a desert made out of ferns, you would appreciate that. If the trees are cut back in an area, the ferns proliferate. They say, oh, cool, this is good. Deer and moose browse make it even worse. So these are three types of ferns that take over, because one of the things they do is to produce exudates, which keep other plants from growing. And here's pictures of the ferns, just to show you, hay-seeded on the left, New York fern on the right. Notice that the way they grow, I tried to take picture one, the one on the right I took, and the one on the left I downloaded. And you'll notice they grow singly and they're heavily divided. You don't find these clumps. And here's a picture of bracken fern, which I'm sure most of you know. It's really a single stem, and it goes up a couple feet and then it subdivides into fronds. Goldenrod. This is the plant that really got me interested in this subject. At the time I visited Cornell, I knew we were looking at Solidago canadensis, but I've done a lot of reading on this, and the studies are inconsistent. This is not a really easy thing to study because you have to find the substances. How are they given off? How can we collect them? How can we treat other plants? It's very common now. I do it myself. I have a patch of goldenrod, Solidago canadensis, it happens to be, in my garden because I'm a beekeeper and I love it in the autumn of the year. And I've been watching that area to see if plants that are around it are having a difficult time growing, and to date they have not been. The studies are very inconsistent. It's so difficult to do. But, people always think that invasive species come here, but we send invasive species by accident or intentionally as decorative plants sometimes to other countries. And in Europe and Asia, this form of goldenrod is extremely invasive, and it kills plants and natives and butterfly species, because if the larvae feed upon it at all, or if they pick up the nectar, there seems to be something there which kills them. Is this allelopathic? People are not entirely sure, because a great deal more studies need to be done. You've all heard of spotted knapweed as an invasive, and this works because its roots give off a substance into the soil, and it doesn't kill other plants, it just keeps them from growing well. So people sometimes kind of ignore this because it's kind of cute in its own way. But the exudates have been picked up, have been worked with in a laboratory, have been spread in areas for other plants. One of the other difficulties with studying this is that you have to try to have the same concentration in an experiment that you would have in nature. We also have allelopathy in certain pines. And the Japanese red pine, a non-native, but is planted here and produces an acid. And this particular acid from the needles, they believe, may cause this effect. Work is being done on it. The needles and cones themselves do cause this effect, but studies are being made to study the needles to see if they keep other plants from growing. And then down below, I have a picture of the Japanese red pine. Japanese knotweed. I'm a beekeeper, and honeybees love Japanese knotweed. So I'm on the fence on this one because it's just so very, very aggressive, as you well know. But some beekeepers think it should be left alone. I can't quite agree with that. But that's a plant you've probably seen in many places, so let's talk about that. It has leach nets, and that induce changes in the soil nitrogen. So this is another way of causing problems for plants. And it acts on the growth of native species, but it allows their seeds to germinate. Okay, interestingly enough, research has shown if you add activated charcoal to the soil, it reduces these effects. This is ongoing research, so keep an eye on it. But I thought that was absolutely fascinating. What about giant hogweed? Guess what? It doesn't seem to affect other species very much at all, just the human species. Hydrilla, I'm sure you've heard of this. It's allelopathic to common hornwort and prickly hornwort. Hydrilla is a non-native species. Common hornwort and prickly hornwort are native species, and therefore it is affecting waterways. Hydrilla grows faster. It is believed to be allelopathic. It has been collected, and these other plants have been put in the same containers, exposed to light. They have made some measurements of substances which are given off, and this is one of the reasons that it has been very, very successful. Of course, I had to put Kuzo in, even though we don't have it up here, because everybody has seen this picture somewhere. And it works because it keeps seeds from germinating, okay? And It loves undisturbed open areas. Just look at that. I'm sure you've seen other pictures. Okay, but the leaves, when they fall, or when the leaves are still on the plant, they give off a substance through their stomates, which affects the growth of other plants. Garlic mustard. You know, when I was trained as a master gardener, I was told that this was allelopathic. And I have probably in my lifetime told people this as well. But the research is very mixed on this plant. It's a biennial, okay? The rosettes stay green all year, starts growing early in the spring, which gives it an advantage. It smells like garlic. You can eat it if you wish. Somebody brought me a plant that they had dug up, and they thought that it was garlic mustard. It was not. It was a violet because the leaves look very, very similar. So if somebody does this for you, if they really dig it up, take a good look at the taproot, okay? And this has a S-shaped taproot at the top, like the letter S, and the roots of violets go straight out of the plant down into the soil. It's not easy to study. It's been studied over 20 years, and they've studied its effects on other plants, its effects on bacteria and microbes, and the research so far does not support the idea that it's allelopathic. It probably is doing so well because it starts to grow so early and it gets at the nutrients that are available before other plants do. So as I put here, not what I've been told. And my source for this, I put down here in case any of you wish to look this up in the Journal of the Torrey Botanical Society. I thought that was really interesting because I had been taught that it was allelopathic. Here are some allelopathic garden plants, which I'm sure many of you grow. Elderberries, rhododendron, bearberry, forsythia, and so forth. The interesting thing in this list, I thought, were sunflowers. Work has been done on sunflowers because all sunflowers are not allelopathic. Some are not. And I often wonder when I see these beautiful fields of sunflowers, if those particular species of sunflowers are the ones that are allelopathic. Otherwise, I'm serious, they probably have a lot of weeding to do. So that's a really interesting one. And you might think about sunflowers that you have grown in your garden. Broccoli has been shown to suppress the growth of other members of the same plant family. So if there's cabbage nearby, it tends not to grow too well. For example, if you have other broccoli plants, it forces you to plant your broccoli at a distance from each other, because if you plant them too close, the ones that are in between very often won't even grow at all, because the broccoli exudes a substance into the soil and it slows down their growth. Very clever, because it's cutting down on competition. I put all these other ones here. Wild ginger. I had a patch of wild ginger in my garden for at least 10 years. And I thought, May, you are well behaved. And then all of a sudden, it took off and it spreads. And it never occurred to me that it was allelopathic until I did research and thought about my own gardens, because where it spreads, there aren't even weeds. This is a plant with green leaves. Most people don't even think it flowers, but it does. The flowers are underneath the leaves and they're pollinated by ants. And if you look under your ginger in the spring, the wild ginger that you may be growing in your garden, you can see the flowers, but you have to go out of your way. But I thought this list would be helpful to you as well. So here are some useful aspects of allelopathy. We're looking at it, at least I was originally, because it was so absolutely fascinating to me. But there are people that believe that they can use this in commercial crops to boost their traits for weed suppression. As you all know, I hope, genetically modified plants, frankly, people who worry about this, it's sort of like closing the barn door after the horse got out. You've heard that saying, because this has been going on for over 25 years. Some people believe that if we study allelopathic traits and we find the genes that cause them, that some of those genes could be transplanted into species of plants that are usable to human beings. And it would keep us from having to use, I mean, a lot of this is choice, as you well know, regular insecticides. So I leave that information with you. Okay, they could be used to control weeds. As I mentioned earlier, work is being done on sunflowers for that very thing. And some people believe that you can use them in crop rotation, cover cropping with to smother things, for mulches, and there's work being done here. So some good allelopathic residue management practices may be in the future. But we need to be careful. All the products that are created by these plants are not benign. I am sure that everybody here has heard people say, oh yeah, such and such is a great product because it's organic. And I look at them and I say, oh, the oil secreted by poison ivy is organic. Do you want to go out and touch it to your skin? And they say, well, no. And then I say, well, you know, I grow rhubarb, which I do in my garden. Should I go out and eat my rhubarb leaves? And they say, of course not. They're very, very high in oxalic acid. So we have to be careful, people, because if something is organic, of course, does not mean that it's benign. And the residues of some of these oleochemicals can exist in the soil for a long time, especially if you have had a black walnut tree. You've heard of sick soil. Sick soil can be caused by a lot of things. People associate soil sickness, for example, with chemicals, right? In areas where there may have been chemical plants and so on and so forth. But you also can have sick soil from the exudates that are given off by plants. So it's something that you need to think about. Companion planting. This leads you right into that subject of companion planting. And I hear about this constantly. The research, again, is a little bit iffy. It's contradictory. People will tell you all the time, oh, sure, this has to grow with this, that has to go with that. But we're not sure why some plants do better in one place as they do in another. An example of this would be garlic with roses. Now, I don't grow my garlic in my rose garden. I grow it in my herb garden. Garlic does not give off very much into soil. If you think about that, if you grow garlic and you dig that garlic, you can barely smell it unless you wound the plant. Many people have said, oh, it keeps roses from getting name disease, insert name of disease, insert name of insect. But the research yet is not there. So this is something to keep an eye on in the future. Some effects that we see in plants are not allelopathic. We might think they might be, but again, research. Okay. Sometimes it's the time of germination. Whoever germinates first has an advantage. We got there we got here first. Bigger plants get water and nutrients more easily because they have better developed roots, right? And many invasives, as we mentioned earlier, begin to grow earlier in the season and they grab all the resources. That's not allelopathic. All plants release substances into the soil. That is the nature of plants. They're living things. They give off products just as we do. But that's not all allelopathy. This is, as far as I'm concerned, a new subject. I said to my husband the other day, boy, do I have ideas if I wanted a PhD in biology. And he said to me, Carol Ann, you couldn't get the money. The money isn't out there. But, that is a very important point because you would need support for this. Why is it important? It's a great alternative to using chemical herbicides. And there we go. And people, there's a great deal more to be learned. I welcome your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol Ann. That was fascinating. So everybody, there are quite a few of us, 48 of us on tonight. So if you have questions, if you'd like to type them into the chat box, that would be great. And there are a few already. So Carol Ann, I'll start us off.
Thank you.
The first one is from Lynn Bernstein. I have a patch of hay-scented ferns that I planted a spice bush sapling in. Should I transplant the spice bush or remove the ferns?
Yes, I would. I take it it's fairly young, and if you can, I would do so. You have to make choices.
Okay. And when I read your question, if you have any follow-up, you can unmute yourself and chime in. Andrew asks, can soil be tested for the presence of juglone and to what degree?
Juglone can be tested at Cornell University, I understand. I don't know who you would contact. And if you want to know more about that, in fact, I don't mind giving out my email right now. Email me and I'll find out for you. My email is CAHARLOS@verizon.net.
Okay, I just sent that in the chat box for anybody who is interested. Let's see, Lori and Dave ask, how long does the soil impact last?
How long does the juglone last?
Yes.
I'm sorry, juglone lasts? Depends on the concentration and it depends on the soil. It can be years.
Okay. Okay, does anybody else have questions? Carol Ann, I have one. I'm curious, for the native species that aren't affected by the juglone, I think you mentioned yellow poplar and gooseberry and some others. Any idea why they're not affected?
Well, every everything in this world is chemistry, and their chemistry is different. It's not, it's simple. I keep saying that, but I know, but it's true. Their chemistry is just simply different. They don't respond to the same things in their environment. They give off their own exudates as well. So there are some plants, as I mentioned earlier, that will grow underneath black walnut trees.
Okay, Julian asks, do we know if the chemicals are inhibiting the plants directly, or are they targeting the symbiotic fungi in the soil that competitors require?
Oh, thank you for mentioning that. Yes, it is believed that that some of them affect the mycorrhizae in the soil and the roots of the plant. But most plants that are illeopathic don't do it through their roots. They do it through their leaves, and they give off substances through their stomates. We don't want to get too hung up on black walnut trees because, you know, they do it every which way.
Okay. And Julian followed up then with another question. Do we find allelopathic plants having different symbiotes?
Do they have different symbiosis?
Symbiotes, like
Symbiotes?
or yes.
No, no, they don't.
Okay. Okay, anybody else? Okay, I don't think, thank you, Caroline. I don't think there are any other questions.